Hey friends, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to drop a comment saying where you're listening from, or just leave a quick comment saying I'm doing my part. At 4:48 a.m. on the morning of June 10th, 2016, police in Larimer County, Colorado issued an urgent alert. 18-year-old Ashley Doolittle was missing and feared to be in danger. This kind of pre-dawn bulletin was almost unheard of for a teen who had been gone a few hours. Ashley was due home by 7:30 the night before, but officers had good reason for the alarm. Ashley had recently broken up with her boyfriend, 18-year-old Tanner Flores, and investigators suspected she was with him and that he was armed. By sunrise, a frantic search was underway, and the tight-knit community braced for the worst. Sadly, their darkest fears were soon confirmed. The beloved rodeo queen's bright future had been shattered by a brutal slaying. Ashley Doolittle was a well-known figure in her hometown of Berthoud, Colorado, a rodeo princess and gifted horse rider with an infectious smile. She had been named the lady-in-waiting for the Boulder County Fair and Rodeo, poised to serve as the 2017 rodeo queen. Horses were Ashley's passion from early childhood, and she had won multiple riding championships. At 18 years old, she had just graduated high school and been accepted into Colorado State University's agricultural business program for the fall. Tanner Flores had been Ashley's high school boyfriend for about a year, but she chose to end the relationship as she looked ahead to college and a new life on campus. While this is a usual thing, and many of us have been there, the breakup hit Flores extremely hard. Friends later told investigators that they had never seen him so depressed, and on June 8th he even sent a late-night Snapchat message implying he was gonna off himself. Earlier that day, Flores had gone through Ashley's phone and become upset by messages between her and other male friends. This invasion of privacy led to a furious argument and the final breakup of their on-again, off-again relationship. Flores was hurt and angry, and in the hours that followed he began to formulate a disturbed plan. On June 9th, 2016, Flores persistently pressed Ashley to meet with him, ostensibly to talk things through one last time. That morning, he surreptitiously took his father's revolver from a locker and even drove out near Carter Lake to fire off some test rounds. Ashley, busy with a rodeo event earlier in the day, agreed to meet him later that afternoon. She met Flores at a parking area by Lon Hagler Reservoir in Loveland, expecting a civil conversation. Instead, he drove her to a secluded spot near Carter Lake under the guise of continuing their talk. When Ashley tried to step out of the truck, Flores hit the gas to prevent her escape. In a moment of rage, he reached behind the seat, grabbed the hidden weapon, and shot Ashley point blank inside the truck. He fired multiple times, striking her twice in the head. In an instant, the vibrant young rodeo star was brutally slain by the person she had once trusted most. When Ashley failed to return home on June 9th, her family immediately knew something was wrong. Late that night, her mother reported Ashley missing to the Larimer County Sheriff's Office after finding the teen's car abandoned near Lon Hagler Reservoir. This was the site where she had agreed to meet Flores, raising immediate alarm. Sheriff's deputies quickly learned that Flores had also vanished, and that a weapon was missing from his father's home. Fearing the worst, authorities issued the rare pre-dawn alert and mobilized resources to find the pair. Those investigative efforts paid off within hours. By 8 the next morning, June 10th, authorities had traced Flores's pickup truck to a remote property nearly 300 miles away in Colebran, on Colorado's western slope. A woman living next to that property, formerly owned by Flores's deceased grandfather and then unoccupied, spotted the suspect's white truck in the driveway and observed a disturbing sight. There was a man believed to be Tanner Flores lifting a bundled blanket from the truck's back seat and setting it on the ground. Shockingly, the bag contained what looked like a human arm protruding from the bundle. That was enough for Mesa County authorities to act. The Mesa County Sheriff's SWAT team rushed to the scene, set up a perimeter, and kept watch as Flores moved about the house and yard, even tossing blood-soaked rags into a field. Around 10:30, officers moved in and took Flores into custody. The worst outcome was confirmed when they discovered Ashley's lifeless body wrapped in a blanket in the back of the truck. Under questioning later that day, Flores initially tried to claim that Ashley's death was an accident. He soon recanted and confessed that he had intentionally shot her out of anger. According to an arrest affidavit, Flores admitted shooting Ashley because he was angry with her, describing how he slew her near Carter Lake. He then drove her body to his grandfather's vacant house, where he cleaned her up before returning her to his truck. Flores described how he spent hours at the Colbrand house with Ashley's body, washing her clothes and redressing her before dawn broke on June 10th. He then carried the body back to his truck before law enforcement closed in. Flores was formally arrested on charges related to the crime. What had begun as a missing person case had now become a high-profile homicide investigation. The trial of Tanner Flores took place in late September 2017 in Larimer County, drawing local attention. Flores himself took the witness stand during the week-long trial, tearfully admitting to shooting Ashley, but insisting he had never planned to slay her. His defense attorney echoed that stance, arguing the event wasn't deliberate or premeditated, and urging jurors to consider a lesser charge. Prosecutors, however, presented a starkly different narrative. They laid out evidence that Flores had plotted the crime. From the stolen gun and persistent texts luring Ashley to meet, it all pointed to a calculated act, fueled by jealousy and rage. After 6 days of testimony, the jury needed only a short deliberation to reach a verdict. On October 4th, 2017, they found Tanner Flores guilty on all counts. At 19 years old, the man who had taken Ashley's life now faced spending the rest of his own life behind bars. The following day, Flores returned to court for sentencing. Colorado law mandated a life sentence for a first-degree charge. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 32 years for the kidnapping charge. Ashley's family filled the courtroom, and her mother, Ann Doolittle, delivered a poignant statement about the immense loss. She described how Flores's actions had robbed their family of a beloved daughter and all the milestones they would never share, from wedding days to simple everyday moments. Yet, even in her grief, Anne-Marie expressed compassion for Flores. She told the court there were no winners in this tragedy, and that 2 families had been destroyed. She even extended sympathy to the Flores family, recognizing that they too lost a child in a way, as Tanner's own life was effectively over. Flores, shackled and dressed in an orange jumpsuit, declined to speak when given an opportunity to address the court. It's impossible to walk away from Ashley Doolittle's story without feeling the sheer senselessness of it. This wasn't a situation where tensions escalated over time, or where anyone could pretend the ending was inevitable. Ashley was an 18-year-old kid with her whole life opening up in front of her. She broke up with someone because she was ready to move forward, ready to grow, ready to start a new chapter. That's normal. That's healthy. It's virtually a rite of passage to break up with your high school girlfriend or boyfriend at some time after graduation. Flora's actions were the result of someone who couldn't handle rejection, control, or independence. He was someone who had been showing signs for a long time that he was emotionally unstable, obsessive, and volatile. In a way, Tanner was a ticking time bomb. The breakup wasn't the cause. It was the trigger. The danger was already there. simmering under the surface, long before Ashley walked away. And that's the part that sticks with me. This didn't have to happen. It shouldn't have happened. Ashley did nothing wrong. She made a normal, healthy choice, and someone else's inability to handle that choice turned into a nightmare. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here reminding you to subscribe and hit the notification bell and turn on all those notifications. Also remember to check out the membership option by clicking join or hit the Patreon link in the description. On an ordinary evening in October 2012, 19-year-old Lizzie Marriott left her job and headed to visit a friend in Dover, New Hampshire. She promised to be home around midnight, but Lizzie never returned. Within days, the University of New Hampshire sophomore's disappearance sparked a frantic search and revealed a disturbing tale of deceit and violence. The same coastal waters Lizzie loved as a marine biology student became the hiding place for a terrible crime. Lizzie was a friendly UNH sophomore living with her aunt and uncle off campus. On the night of October 9th, 2012, after class, she told her family she was going to hang out with some new friends and would be back around midnight. She left campus to meet 18-year-old Kat McDonough, a co-worker friend, at an apartment in Dover. Kat lived there with her 30-year-old boyfriend, Seth Mazzaglia. When Lizzie failed to come home or show up at work the next day, her relatives grew increasingly worried. By October 11th, missing person posters covered the UNH campus as police and volunteers searched urgently for any sign of her. Friends soon told police that Lizzie had planned to visit Kat's apartment on the night she vanished, a fact confirmed by text messages on Lizzie's phone. Acting on this lead, police questioned Kat and Seth on October 12th. Their stories immediately clashed in a very major way. Kat claimed Lizzie never arrived, while Seth eventually admitted that Lizzie had been at their apartment and was now dead. Acting on Seth's information, officers searched the Piscataqua River shoreline at Pierce Island in Portsmouth, where he said they had dumped Lizzie's body. On October 13th, authorities announced that Lizzie was presumed dead, and they arrested Seth Mazzaglia, charging him in her slaying. With Mazzaglia in custody, attention turned to Kat McDonough and what exactly had happened in that apartment. A search of dumpsters near the couple's building yielded evidence like a pair of gloves and some of Lizzie's clothes. Those gloves, Kat later revealed, were worn by Seth when he strangled Lizzie, a chilling sign of premeditation. Forensic testing also found DNA from both Seth and Lizzie on certain items, supporting that an illicit assault had occurred. The pair had also tampered with evidence. Investigators later uncovered that Mazzaglia and McDonough used her phone to send fake text messages as an alibi, and then deleted them to hide their tracks. Initially, Kat stuck to her lie. Days after Lizzie's death, she told an attorney that Lizzie had died accidentally during a consensual act between the two women. Kat remained free for 2 months, even as Lizzie's family demanded answers and justice. Finally, on December 24, 2012, police arrested her for lying to investigators and helping cover up the crime. Facing charges of hindering prosecution and witness tampering, the 19-year-old struck a plea deal in 2013 and agreed to testify against Mazzaglia in exchange for a reduced sentence. She ultimately received a prison term of up to 3 years for her role. Once she began cooperating with authorities, Kat revealed the harrowing truth about that night. She testified that Seth Mazzaglia had coerced her into luring an unsuspecting victim for his violent carnal desires. When Lizzie arrived expecting an innocent movie night, Seth made unwanted advances toward her. Lizzie rebuffed him, and in a fury he attacked. Kat recounted that Seth strangled Lizzie with a rope, even putting on gloves beforehand, and then continued to assault her after she went limp. Kat, who described herself as trapped under Seth's domineering control, did nothing to intervene because she was terrified of him. After the slaying, the couple methodically tried to cover their tracks. They drove to Portsmouth and dumped Lizzie's body into the river at a remote spot on Pierce Island. They then threw the rope, suitcase, and other evidence into dumpsters before abandoning her car back on campus. These actions explained why, despite exhaustive searches, Lizzie's body was never recovered. It had likely been carried away by strong currents. Mazzaglia's trial began in May 2014. The prosecution's case relied heavily on Kat McDonough's testimony. Over about 10 days on the stand, Kat detailed the dark relationship she had with Mazzaglia and the events of Lizzie's final night. Prosecutors bolstered her account with physical evidence, such as the gloves and DNA findings, and with Mazzaglia's own writings. Letters from Mazzaglia revealed his desire to dominate and control Kat without mercy. An expert also testified to explain how Kat could have felt too afraid and isolated to resist him. Notably, Mazzaglia did not testify in his own defense, leaving Kat's account as the primary narrative for jurors to consider. The defense countered with a very different story. Mazzaglia's attorneys claimed that Kat was lying and that Lizzie's death was actually a tragic accident. According to them, this occurred during a consensual encounter between the two women. They argued that Seth's only wrongdoing was helping dispose of the body out of misplaced loyalty to Kat. To support their case, the defense reminded jurors that Kat herself had initially stuck to the accidental suffocation story on video before changing her account. They also observed that this was after she could have confessed everything to the authorities. After less than 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict on June 27, 2014, guilty on all counts. Mazzaglia was convicted of first-degree slaying, as well as an additional charge for committing this act during an illicit assault. He received the mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the August 2014 sentencing hearing, Lizzie's family addressed Mazzaglia through tears, describing the pain he had inflicted. Mazzaglia, given a chance to speak, still insisted he hadn't done anything to Lizzie and apologized only for hiding her death. The judge, unmoved by his denial, officially imposed the life term, though ultimately this was a mandatory sentence. Mazzaglia remains in prison for life, but Kat McDonough was released in 2016 after serving her sentence. Some felt her punishment was too light given her role in the crime. However, Lizzie's own parents have expressed some degree of compassion toward Kat, believing that Seth's manipulation heavily influenced her actions. Notably, while awaiting trial, Mazzaglia even tried to orchestrate a brazen escape from jail, a scheme that was foiled and brought additional charges against him. Sadly, Lizzie Marriott's body was never recovered from the water. In lieu of a grave, her family created a memorial bench near a quiet lake in the Massachusetts woods to remember her. In my own view, Kat McDonough's sentence feels far too light, and I realize that this might be somewhat controversial, so let me explain it further. I don't dismiss the reality of the control Seth Mazzaglia had over her. Coercive, manipulative relationships can twist a person's world until they can't see straight. But even with all that, she still had choices. She still had moments where she could have stopped everything from unfolding the way it did. She could have warned Lizzie not to come over that night. She could have stepped outside and called the police. She could have reached out to anyone in her life and said something wasn't right. Instead, she helped lure Lizzie into that apartment, stayed silent during the attack, and then participated in the cleanup afterward. There were a lot of off-ramps where she could have saved Lizzie's life, or at the very least made sure her body was recovered. Her testimony was important, and I get why prosecutors needed it, but that doesn't erase her actions. Without her testimony, convicting Seth would have been much more difficult without a body. But cooperation after the fact doesn't undo the damage done in the moment when Lizzie needed someone to stand up for her. And knowing she served such a short sentence, walked out of prison, and got to restart her life while Lizzie's family never got their daughter back, that's something I just can't square. It feels like accountability never matched the gravity of what she allowed to happen. 16-year-old Joyce McLean was the kind of teenager who made her small town of East Millinocket, Maine, very proud. She was bright and talented. She was a popular cheerleader, honor student, and band member at Schenck High School. Joyce had displayed extraordinary musical ability from an early age, and even enjoyed composing her own songs. She had just earned her driver's license and was excitedly planning a beach party for her 17th birthday. To paraphrase what her mother Pam later said, Joyce was very excited to be heading into a new phase of her life. Unfortunately, this bright new phase of her life would never be Joyce's reality. On the warm evening of August 8, 1980, Joyce set out for a routine jog to get in shape for the upcoming soccer season. She left home around 7:30 p.m., running toward the fields behind her high school, and was seen heading into the twilight near the school grounds. This would be the last known sighting of her alive. When she failed to return home, her mother grew worried and drove around looking for her, but Joyce had vanished. Her mother quickly alerted police, and for 2 days and nights, family and friends combed the community for any trace of the missing teen. Then, on Sunday morning, August 10th, 1980, a volunteer searcher discovered a horror no one in East Millinocket ever expected. Joyce's lifeless body was found in the woods along a power line clearing behind Schenck High School's athletic fields. Her skull was crushed by a heavy blow, her hands were tied behind her back with a piece of cloth, and there were marks suggesting she had been strangled with an object. Her clothing was in disarray, but investigators determined she had not been subject to an indecent assault. The idyllic peace of East Millinocket was shattered by the grim discovery. In a town where doors were usually left unlocked, residents now found themselves afraid, wondering who could have done such a thing in their midst. Pam McLean publicly pleaded for anyone with information to come forward, vowing that neither she nor the perpetrator would ever know peace until he was caught. And yeah, spoiler alert, Pam was going to make good on this promise. The initial police investigation faced daunting hurdles. Detectives determined that Joyce had likely been slain the same night she went missing, but beyond that, hard evidence was scarce. One person did emerge early on as a potential suspect, 19-year-old Scott Fournier. In the pre-dawn hours after Joyce disappeared, Fournier had stolen a fuel truck from a local garage and crashed it a short distance from the school, suffering a serious head injury. He was in a coma for weeks afterward, and when questioned, Fournier initially claimed to remember nothing about that night. But in May 1981, he gave a statement to police that sounded like a confession, saying he might have beat Joyce while he was in a drunken haze. A few days later, he recanted that story, insisting he had only had a bad dream, and given the magnitude of his brain injury, this seemed plausible. Over the ensuing years, Fournier made several troubling remarks about the crime. He allegedly confessed to a pastor and separately to his own parents in the 1980s, and later even told a coworker that he was responsible for Joyce's demise. In these retellings, he sometimes implicated other men, but investigators eventually ruled out all the people he named. Notably, Fournier knew details about the crime scene that had never been made public. For example, he described how Joyce's hands were tied behind her back. Still, without any physical evidence or a consistent, credible confession, police didn't charge Fournier or anyone else, and by the mid-80s, Joyce McLean's case went cold. For the next 30-plus years, Joyce's family and neighbors kept her memory alive and the quest for justice ongoing. Pam McLean refused to let the authorities forget her daughter's case. She and the community formed a Justice for Joyce committee and held candlelight vigils on anniversaries associated with Joyce and the investigation. In 2008, nearly 28 years after the slaying, Pam's perseverance led to a dramatic turn. That year, with community fundraising support, Joyce's body was exhumed for a fresh forensic examination. Forensic specialists Doctors Michael Baden and Henry Lee conducted a new autopsy and announced that they had found physical evidence that gave investigators renewed hope. They didn't publicly disclose what the new evidence was, but it was the most significant break in the case in decades. Ultimately, it's unclear what this evidence was, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. At any rate, it's safe to assume that this evidence wasn't the potential bombshell it was thought to be. That said, sometimes causation has a funny way of working things out, and without this apparent dead-end path, Fournier likely would have gotten away with it. Following the exhumation, Maine State Police reopened the McLean investigation. Detectives in 2008 began re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing the case from scratch. In 2009, authorities publicly confirmed that Scott Fournier, long quietly suspected, was a person of interest in Joyce's slaying. As the cold case squad dug in, new witnesses emerged to bolster the case. One former colleague of Fournier's came forward with a story. Back in 1989, Fournier had suddenly blurted out a confession to him at work. Tips like these, combined with the forensic re-examination, strengthened the circumstantial case against Fournier piece by piece. After years of painstaking work, investigators and prosecutors concluded they finally had enough to secure a conviction. On March 4, 2016, nearly 36 years after the event, Maine State Police arrested 55-year-old Fournier and charged him. Fournier went on trial in January 2018, and he waived his right to a jury, leaving the verdict up to a judge. This was apparently a strategic move by his defense counsel in light of Fournier's multiple confessions over the course of the years. They had believed that a judge would be more likely to accept evidence that Fournier's statements were the result of a traumatic brain injury rather than any real commission of a crime. Given that this is a video on solved cases rather than unsolved mysteries, I'm sure I don't have to telegraph to you any further how well this strategy ultimately worked out. Because forensic evidence linking him to the crime was virtually non-existent, the prosecution's case focused on Fournier's own words and knowledge. They presented testimony about his multiple confessions over the years, and the specific details he knew about the crime scene that only the perpetrator would know. The defense argued that Fournier's so-called admissions were the unreliable ramblings of a man who had suffered a brain-damaging head injury on the night in question. His lawyers suggested that his memories were confused or imagined, and they pointed to other possible culprits. After hearing 2 weeks of evidence, Superior Court Justice Anne Murray rendered her verdict on February 22, 2018. She found Scott Fournier guilty in Joyce McLean's case, finally closing a chapter that had haunted the community for nearly 38 years. Justice Murray sentenced him to 45 years in prison, and in 2019, Maine's highest court upheld Fournier's conviction, ensuring that he remained behind bars. Ultimately, the slogan, "Justice for Joyce," was fulfilled, and this cold case was solved after a decades-long fight for truth and accountability.